So hello and good evening, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Salvador Munoz, and I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs and Outreach at Poster House, which is, of course, the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the arts and history of the poster. I am so excited to welcome you to this evening's program, a virtual curatorial tour of our newest exhibition, Black Power to Black People, Branding the Black Panther Party. Tonight, curator and Poster House's very own education coordinator, Es-pranza Humphrey, will walk us through this powerful exhibition and share insights into how the Black Panther Party leveraged graphic design to shape the messaging of their radical agenda. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few notes on accessibility for this event. Automated closed captioning is available, and you can turn it on or off by clicking the CC button on the bottom of your screen. This program will be recorded and made available for all registered attendees after the event. And if you have any questions during the program, you can go ahead and drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A box, and I'll go ahead and rudely interrupt Es-pranza to interject your question for you. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the star of tonight's program, Es-pranza.
Thank you all again for coming virtually to the exhibition. A note on accessibility is that some people aren't able to physically come to the museum, so it's great to have programs like this that are virtual that we can kind of like still discuss the posters while you all are not in New York or not planning to come to New York in the coming months. So I think that this is a really special event, and I'm really happy to present to you all. So you know why you're here, because you all registered, but we are talking about Black Power to Black People, branding the Black Panther Party. As Salvador mentioned, I welcome questions. Rudely interrupt me, not rudely interrupt me. Salvador, you're never rude, so that's not even a worry. But please ask any questions that you have. I'm actually gonna comment on how the title came about for this exhibition. So if that was a question that you have, just hold really tight to that question because I will explain it. I think that it's because it makes me very happy to think about how the title came about. So for those who are unable to come or are just waiting after this wonderful curatorial virtual tour to come, this is how the exhibition looks on the outside before you walk through. Black Power to Black People is on the left side, and then on the right side, our virtual right, is Branding the Black Panther Party. Also, to everybody, if you hear my cat, you probably understand it because you probably have a cat too. So he is very he has the zoomies right now, so he's doing everything, or he's just excited about Black Power. So this is the way the exhibition looks in the front. And before I start the virtual tour, I want to just very cleanly and clearly outline the definition of Black nationalism. And I think it's mostly because a lot of people do know that the Black Panther Party isn't just a national organization, it's an international organization. It was an international organization and its impact was international. But it's important to think about why, especially at the start of the exhibition, Black nationalism is a word that comes up and why it frames what we're going to talk about today. So Black nationalism, and I got these definitions off of Merriam-Webster online. Black nationalism is a type of racial nationalism which espouses the belief that Black people are a race and seeks to develop and maintain a Black racial and national identity. When you think about the word identity, that's where we're kind of putting a thread between identity and that branding. How do you identify Black power? Which leads me to the next slide, identifying the definition for Black power. The mobilization of the political and economic power of Black Americans, especially to compel respect for their rights and improve their condition. I put Black Americans mainly because we're talking about the Black Panther Party and we're talking about its founding and its influence, but we do know that Black power is transcendent. It transcends the US in certain ways, especially during this time period. So now that I've outlined those definitions, let's jump into it. So again, a gallery view. The first wall we're going to be looking at, of posters that we're going to be looking at, is this first part, the image of Black America. This is a it's not a chronological exhibition. This is thematic. So when we think about the branding of the Black Panther Party, what we're thinking about is how the Black Panther Party takes this idea of Black power and brands it in a way that we can identify so many symbols and icons today and associate that with the Black Panther Party. You all might be thinking right now of like Black berets or a Black Panther. So we're thinking about how the Black Panther Party is taking Black power and running with it to create an identity and therefore to create a brand. And we start the story by thinking of the image of Black America. So we have these two posters on display. One thing that I really wanted to make sure was, I wanted to be very considerate of the images used in this exhibition. I am a Black woman, and sensational images, violent imagery, it kind of disconnects me from a lot of content. But it's still very important to put that historical lens onto things because things can be graphic, but I know that we can still do the work of getting the point across without such violent imagery. So the image on the left is a minstrel image, but I think that this one gets the point across. We can think about the minstrel imagery in this one and we can move forward from it rather than those that kind of make you sit there and just make you uncomfortable and might add to the violence and the emotional labor that you probably have to do by virtue of just walking into a gallery that's going to talk about Black history. So minstrelsy. Minstrelsy was very prevalent during and mainly prevalent after the Civil War. So we're thinking of the mid to late 1800s. And minstrelsy incorporates the act of blackface, which is darkening your face, exaggerating the lips, widening the eyes as a caricature of Blackness. And this was done by white and Black performers, popularized by someone that we probably are familiar with, at least the name Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a character played by Thomas Daddy Rice. It's when you're in a different state or when you're in a different part of the country and you're not always exposed to Black people, these minstrel performers were going to be your only view and your only understanding and your only knowledge of Blackness. And that is to say that this is all offensive. Like these are all just offensive caricatures of Blackness. And there are a number of stock characters that come with minstrelsy. For men, two of the stock characters that we outline in the exhibition are the Zip Coon and the Sambo figure. And those are figures that were happy during times of enslavement and long for another time of enslavement and are lazy and don't have any scruples about the history of enslavement. And so this figure on the left is the Sambo caricature. And then on the right, we have a number of, just like for Black men, we have a number of caricatures, stock characters for Black women. The image on the right is the stock character of the Jezebel, who's a hypersexualized Black woman. And she is meant to provoke and entice white men to inflict violence onto her, and they can't be held accountable because she tempted those men, and she's the reason why things are happening to her. So very hypersexualized. And so I counter that. This is a circus poster. I counter this image, and this would have happened well into the 40s, as you can see, circa 1945. I counter this image with the image on the right, which we probably can identify as being almost the polar opposite of what we're seeing on the image and the image to the left. So Huey Newton is in the peacock chair, like face forward, stoic expression with arms in each hand. We have a Zulu shield in the back, and it's this very powerful image. He has the quintessential Black Power military uniform on, and we'll talk more about that. And it's a commanding expression, and it's a commanding poster. If you all are familiar with Frederick Douglass is the most photographed man of the 19th century. And he made it a point to never smile in pictures because he didn't want to be seen as the Sambo caricature or the Zip Coon or anything like that. He was very serious. And I think that we can say that fairly, that Huey Newton is kind of evoking that spirit of, I need to be like, this is serious. I'm showing you that this is what the image of Black America is. It is understanding the plight of that we had to go through, understanding the struggles that we had to go through, and taking ownership of our own image, and therefore exhibiting it to the public. So that's how we start the show. We start thinking about, why is it important to create a brand? It's important to create a brand because Black people do not have ownership, or have limited ownership over our own being and the way we're presented. The second part of the exhibition is the party and the brand. And this section is going to investigate kind of how the party gets started, but also what are these things that we are going to continue to see, these icons, these symbols that we're going to continue to see as we move forward in the exhibition. And by the way, everybody, if I look down, it's only to check dates. So much happens in the span of X amount of years for the Black Panther Party that I don't want to give you all the wrong dates. So if I look down, it's probably to note the dates. So this part thinks about the history of the Black Panther Party. And on the wall here, you can actually see, we do a quick summary of how the party even came about. Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale meet in 1966. Huey is actually studying law, like he's well versed in law, and they're thinking about the rumblings, these early rumblings of what Black power looks like. So we start by just dissecting the Black Panther. The history of the Black Panther is long only because it gets into a lot of different people's hands, and it has to evolve, as many things do, but it has to evolve. And so for the exhibition, we try to just focus on the design aspect of the Panther. But there is a lot of history, and if you all are interested in some resources for that history, I'm sure that we can figure out a way to disperse that. But we start the story by giving credit to Ruth Howard. So the Lowndes County Freedom Organization in Alabama needs a distinctive symbol to put on the ballot, because an Alabama law stated that you have to have an identifier on the ballot for people who cannot read. So there has to be a symbol that identifies that that this is what they're voting for. And so in Lowndes County, they are in communication with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And Ruth Howard is already she's mainly stationed in the Atlanta SNCC chapter. And she's already in communications, like she already is thinking about the ways that messages in SNCC could be communicated. And so they kind of commission her essentially to come up with something that could make them identifiable, especially since the Democratic Party at the time had a white rooster as their symbol. And the rooster was, the Democratic Party at that time was associated loosely / heavily with white supremacy. So Ruth Howard, her first iteration is a dove. The dove doesn't have as much impact, so she drafts something else. And this early version of the Panther essentially looks like a cat. And we know that because the next person that designs the Black Panther is Dorothy Zeller. And she realized it's passed on to her, and she's saying, this one kind of looks like a cat, let's kind of make this more Panther-like. So she adds a few more details. She kind of like darkens the color, and she adds some whiskers to it, amongst other things. And then finally, the Black Panther is being used, and next is Lisa Lyons. It gets in the hands of Lisa Lyons, and Lisa Lyons is a member of the Berkeley Independent Socialist Club. So she makes some alterations to the basic design. She smooths it out a little bit. I think she adds a few claws to it. And it's used for Black Power Day in 1966. And it's one of the more recognized versions of the Panther that we see today. You can probably see a bunch of iterations of the Panther. Some details are a little hard to identify, but some of them are very clearly different. And the Black Panther Party asks to use the Black Panther. They see that it's a powerful icon. They see that it's a powerful symbol of this movement, and they ask to use it. And it's adopted as part of not only the namesake for the Black Panther Party, but also a very notable image that we see come up. Another big part of the start of this branding of the Black Panther Party is hiring Emory Douglas to be your Minister of Culture. And as the Minister of Culture, Emory Douglas is tasked with preserving the history and the culture of the Black Panther Party. More namely, and I'll read this from our text, he asked to join the Black Panther Party as the Revolutionary Artist and Minister of Culture, shortened to Minister of Culture. In that position, Douglas was responsible for arts policy and the preservation and protection of the party's culture. He already had a design background. He was already doing this type of work, and he approaches Newton and Seal to join the party because he had already been involved in the Black arts movement. Well, he was part of campus life with the Black arts movement. He was doing work with the Black House. So hiring Emory Douglas allows him to run with this idea of how can I start to mold this organization and preserve this culture and do art that encapsulates Black power. And we have on display this maquette, and maquette is a model. So that's what you see on the right. This maquette of the now poster, which is on the left. No More Riots 2s and 3s. You see two women, and they're holding, one is holding an axe, another is holding a gun. I was able to do an interview with Emory Douglas, and he's the one who actually just told me that the maquette, I was trying to figure out, like, how does this become this? Like, there are lines in it. And he explained to me that the blue lines actually don't register once you print it. So blue lines don't register, and the outcome is this very smooth image that you can distribute all over. And we have our iconic Black Panther right under the word "and" for this. A really big part of Emory Douglas's work is that he's depicting women as revolutionaries, and we can talk more about that when we go to the newspaper. But Emory Douglas plays a large part in this branding, especially once he gets a hold of the newspaper. And then another part of this branding is our Black Panther uniform, which is the leather jacket, Black pants, Black shoes, the beret, and exposed arms. The history of the Black Panther Party being able to expose their arms is actually arms by, I mean weapons. It's brief. We probably notice it a lot in posters, but a California law actually prohibits them to have arms on the outside of their person. So, and this is in 1967, the laws passed. Ronald Reagan has a part in this, by the way. So we probably, like, eventually Black Panthers can no longer hold these weapons outside of their person. But we have this amazing picture with Bobby and Newton outside of the headquarters. And again, we have our Panther on the bottom left. The next part of the exhibition is the Black Panther, which is the newspaper of the Black Panther Party. And I'm going to stop here just to say something that I mentioned in the beginning of the exhibit, but it's just good to remind audiences of this. In no way is the Black Panther Party the first to have its own newspaper or the first to do a lot of things, as we talked about with the logo. Like, they're not the first ones to use the Panther at all. But again, this exhibition is really thinking about how the Black Panther Party brands these the things that they're distributing, in this sense posters, because we are at Poster House, and in this particular sense newspapers. How are they using their very identifiable imagery to brand Black power and brand themselves as a Black power organization and show that this is their mission and this is how they're pushing forward this mission to the public and galvanizing the community, galvanizing the Black community. So the Black Panther is not the first Black published newspaper at all. But again, Emory Douglas is so thoughtful in the way that he is thinking about design, that he allows the people who are on the cover of the Black Panther newspaper to be humanized. Black people are humanized through his design. Black people, he's naming things for what they are. He's calling people who abuse justice pigs. He's saying, this is a political prisoner. Like, he's naming exactly what it is, and he's naming the issues that encapsulate Black, police brutality, and he's naming the issues that encapsulate the Black community, because he wants you to be able to identify that they are victims of the state, capital S, the state. And so we have this display of newspapers. And the one all the way on the left is one of the earlier ones that we have on display. And you can see how it evolves over time. Emory Douglas they had very limited resources. So that's another thing that makes Emory Douglas's work so amazing. Very limited resources. And Emory Douglas would use black and 9 other colors on rotation. So the week of October 1st, he would use black and green. And let's just say 2 weeks later, he would use black and red. And then the 2 weeks later, he would use black and yellow. So he has these colors on rotation because they don't have enough resources to just have all these, everything printed in every single color that you can ever imagine. So he's thoughtful about this. So the newspaper, as I said, he's identifying that the pigs are running amok. And for the Black Panther Party, pigs are people who abuse their power. A judge can be a pig, police officers can be a pig, people who abuse their power. Emory Douglas, well, I'll say that later. Another thing that I want to point out is that in this exhibition, I wanted to incorporate Black women as much as possible. And if they're not presented on a poster, then I tried to find other ways to present Black women. So I chose these 2 newspaper covers because they have Black women on them. And also the language around the one with Angela Davis, which is in the middle, white on white jury for Angela too, speaks to a very serious trial where she was acquitted by an all white jury, and all the odds are like stacked against the Black Panthers. We'll talk more about this in the last section, but all the odds are stacked against them. So again, language is important. Angela Davis is not an official member of the Black Panther Party, but her image and her likeness is powerful. And then we also have Free Kathleen Cleaver all the way at the end, and Kathleen Cleaver was communications secretary of the Black Panther Party. I want to mention one other thing, since we are Poster House. In the back of these newspapers, while I was doing research for the exhibition, I realized that if you go all the way to the back, they sold posters, and they would be sometimes less than $1, but on average, they would be about $1 or $1.25 outside of California. And you would see these posters I saw them most in community centers. So like the free breakfast program, you would see them. If you just Google any pictures of the Black Panther Party, you'll probably see a lot of the posters. They're in these very public centers, the health clinics. They're on the street. We pasted to walls on the street. When they're selling the newspaper or selling some of their art, like records or books or something, you see these posters like in the Black Panther Party headquarter windows. So these are these are seen throughout the Black community. And you can buy them in the back of the newspaper. And then that also allows you to know that, allows us all to understand that people probably are buying them and also displaying them in their house in some way. Part of and we open up the first newspaper to the back when you walk through the exhibition. So in the back, you can see this poster on the left, H. Rap Brown, man with match, being sold for $1, I believe, in the back of the newspaper that we have on display. So this is an Emory Douglas piece, but I want to focus on the one to the right, because again, we're seeing this revolutionary mother and child. And she's a revolutionary mother because she is a revolutionary as her second shift, or you can say she's a mother as her second shift. She's probably a mother as her first shift, but he's balancing this dynamic of women are caregivers, but also they are part of this revolution. They are part of what we think about when we think about revolutionary action and activating and galvanizing a community. The next section is the enemy of revolution. This is very brief because the nature of the section is actually very brief. It's thinking about the way language is part of that branding. As I mentioned, pigs, and you can see the open newspaper here. Cool. As I mentioned, language is really big in having everybody on the same accord of what Black power is. If we call people who abuse justice their power pigs in New York, and then in Texas they're calling them donkeys, and then in, I don't know, California they're calling them like giraffes, that's not a unifying language. We can no longer identify who the enemy of our revolution is. So Emory Douglas is not the first one to, the Black Panther Party are not the first ones to name people who abuse power pigs, but Emory Douglas is really key in putting a pig on two legs, giving it a uniform, because he recalls a story in which I'm forgetting who it was. It's within the exhibition, but somebody comes into the Black Panther Party headquarters and says, they've been bothering me all day. What can you do with this? And he has like a clip art of a pig. And so Emory really plays with this. And now we have this language that people who abuse power are pigs, and this is what they look like. I interviewed a member of the Black Panther Party, and she would put on puppet shows and introduce children to the language around Black power. We start with this image. Actually, this is a SNCC image, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Sorry that it's a bit blurry. And it poses the question, is he protecting you? And this is how the Black Panther Party is going to respond to something like that. Is he protecting you? No, he's not. And they're going to name it because they're going to use the word murdered by Oakland pigs. So again, thinking about that language, but also we're humanizing the victim in this poster as well. Bobby Hutton is murdered by the Oakland police. A very, very long history of this, but he's 16 years old, and he's the first recruit of the Black Panther Party and the treasurer. And it's a couple days after the assassination of Martin Luther King that they lead 12 Panthers, them along with 12 Panthers are ambushed by Oakland police, and he's murdered. And they have this poster to commemorate the murder. And again, naming what's happening. They're not posing a question, they're naming it for what it is. And he's dressed in his leather jacket with buttons. Also, today I have a button, everybody. You can find it at the gift shop. And then we have this long quote, but what I felt was so powerful about this poster is, and I know I'm saying this a lot, we should probably play a game every time I say humanizing, but truly, this is humanizing the focus of the subject of this poster. And we see the word pig again, but look at the quote underneath it. Look at the power of this imagery of this poster. And the quote says, if we worry about what's going to happen to us, we couldn't accomplish anything. Justice is going to come when the mass of people rise up and see justice done. The more they try to come down on us, the more we'll expose them for what they are, pigs. So again, people who are obstructing justice are the enemies of revolution. I also have this section where your landlord is the enemy of revolution. I think anyone who lives in New York, California, everywhere knows that your landlord is the enemy of revolution. Sorry for any landlords that are in the building. But this is a two-sided, this is a verso, and one side depicts the trial that Bobby Seale goes through. Again, we'll talk about it a little bit later because I go more in depth later. But the other side, and the way we display it in the gallery, you'll see it in another picture. The people who designed the exhibition did such a great job because they found a way to let viewers see both sides, so you can actually read through what the document says. And I'll summarize really quickly. The left side is about landlords, but the right side is a breakdown of finances. And essentially at the end, they just show the public, we are broke. Like, we do not have any money at all. This is what our money has gone to, and this is what's going on. So the enemy of revolution, the capitalist system, your landlord, the pigs. The next part is, and this photo is a little bit cut off, but this red wall, which is our only red wall in the gallery, so it's that much more powerful, is the politics of Black power. And this section it's deep in the sense that politics in general are going to be very deep, but the Black Panther Party they're very smart about showing the public why aligning yourself with like the traditional two-party system, even at this time, is going to do nothing for Black people. And so I'm framing this section to show the party's allegiance and alliance with communism, and also the Peace and Freedom Party, which is a party that merges the tricklings of Black power and is kind of based on this the anti-war movement. So we have a lot of white influence onto the Peace and Freedom Party as well. And so we frame this section, as with some of our other sections, with a historic poster, equal rights for Negroes everywhere. And this is a poster for the campaign of Foster and Ford. Ford is going to be the second Black man in history to run for vice president. And you can drop in the chat if you know who the first Black man in history to run for vice president is. I'm almost positive that almost everybody will know if once the person gets the answer right, but drop it in the chat. So they have this campaign, and it's Vote Communist, and they're tackling the self-determination for the Black Belt. At this time period, a lot of people would have been familiar with what the Black Belt was, and the Black Belt is like a voting block in which the highest percentage of Black people in the United States are like own property there. And so this Black Belt is the focal point of this poster. And they're really thinking about the way to attract Black people to the party by putting a Black person in a position of power, Ford, or the position of potential power to rally Black people to understand that communism is what's going to help Black people kind of escape the shackles of this two-party system, or the influence that the two-party system has had on politics in the United States. So the Black Panther Party is inspired by or taking cues from this early communist rallying. And again, I mentioned that Angela Davis is not an official member of the Black Panther Party, but I think that these posters are powerful because Angela Davis is not running for office in the poster on the right. She's not running for any political position, but her likeness and her image, again, is so powerful that it's for Hall and Tyner's campaign that they use her speaking and they know that the Afro is very symbolic of Black power when we think about Black is beautiful and the movement is beyond that. And behind her is the Declaration of Independence, and therefore our poster is Angela Davis urges you to declare your independence. So thinking about those politics of Black power and how Black power is kind of being shown on a campaign that has nothing really to do with it. She's always aligned herself with communism. I mean, that's why she becomes in the public eye in the first place, because she announces her support for communism. And the Black Panther Party rallies behind her because of that. They see that she's become this public image, and she's vehemently in support of what she says she is, which is communism. But she does eventually run for vice president in 1980. And this is a really cool poster because it tells us exactly where it was displayed. It was displayed at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And if anyone's gone to that school, shout yourself out in the chat. So she has this moment. So we have a moment where we can see exactly where this poster probably was displayed. But more on the specifically Black Panther side, Cleaver also runs for president. This is complicated because the US doesn't specify whether you have to be 35 by inauguration day or 35 when you are just actively running for president. So, and Cleaver is not 35 at this point. So it is a very complicated election. And the only reason why I put air quotes is because he doesn't even get to really finish his campaign. And in many ways, a lot of states don't even take him seriously because they omit him from the ballot. Because of the 35 rule and because of he has a number of people as his running mate, and it gets very complicated. But essentially, it's still important because he's running under the Peace and Freedom Party. And as I mentioned earlier, we have this on display, this little emblem over here. And as I mentioned earlier, the Peace and Freedom Party is aligning themselves with the Black Panther Party in a way that's very clear that this is not like you are voting for a third party in this case. And they were able to get enough votes, by the way, to be on the ballot. So the Peace and Freedom Party is on the ballot. But the cool part of these posters is this is the namesake, the one on the right is the namesake for the exhibition, Black Power to Black People. I see all power to the people, power to the people, but I thought that Black Power to Black People was it's very clear. It sets the message that this is what this exhibition is going to be about, which is Black power to Black people. If other people feel empowered, that's great. But this is very clear that this is what the exhibition is going to focus on. And then I want to point out one other thing. The poster on the left, I always say it reminds me of like Mad Men, if anyone's seen the show. Like it's very like clear cut and everything. But the one on the right kind of is still inspired by the counterculture movement that's happening at this time period. So I think that these are really they're effective in different ways, these two posters. Huey also runs for US Congress, but at the time he's awaiting trial for the alleged murder of John Fry, a police officer. So Kathleen Cleaver actually steps in a lot in during his campaign to speak on his behalf and endorse Newton on the Peace and Freedom Party ticket. And this is displayed in our exhibition. It's a two-sided placard. I will not pretend that there was any deep meaning behind putting this up, aside from the fact that it's just a really cool placard. And it still has the Peace and Freedom Party, so there is reasoning behind it, but I just love this thing. It's just cool. It's cool. And this is how it's displayed in the exhibition. So you can see both sides. And there's a little design nugget in the back where you see this this Black Panther on the green wall. And this is where I mentioned the two-sided landlord poster. This is the other side, and this is how we display it, so you get to see both sides. So we tried to make sure that everyone was able to see. If something was two-sided, you can see both sides. The last part of the exhibition is the vision of freedom. And this part of the exhibition is tying together, it's asking the question, how can we imagine freedom? And it's on the wall in that way. How can we imagine freedom? And my intention behind creating this part of the exhibition is freedom is complicated, because when you look at the posters, and we'll go through them, when you look at the posters, your immediate reaction isn't freedom. But I was inspired by the fact that one, most of the posters mention the word free. Two, these trials that are on this wall are trials where all the odds were stacked against the Black Panther Party, as they were from the very beginning, especially with COINTELPRO, and like just the general public just trying to find any reason for this organization to fall. All the odds are stacked against them, but yet in a lot of these posters, the end result is that the Panthers are acquitted in one way or another. And so when I think about all these odds stacked against them and all the trials and tribulations of the history of this party, I imagine that there was a sense of pride and freeness about that these posters evoke, and in turn that the people who were acquitted or the people who designed these posters probably felt at the time. So pretty complicated, but I want people to understand that it's complicated. Like this last section is complicated, but at the end of all of these, of most of these trials, like there is some sense of freedom, or there is some sense of freeness. This is also the section where I mention the Black Panther Party's focus internationally. So you'll see some gems of like international references, because a lot of international leaders were discussing the issue of Black Americans in America and saying the government does not care about you, which is also part of the draw to different political organizations. So I start the exhibition, like with other parts of the exhibition, with this historical framing. And this is a play that was written by William Du Bois, not to be confused with W.E.B. Du Bois. William Du Bois is a white New York Times journalist. And he wrote the play Haiti, a drama of Black Napoleon. The script was reworked by a Black director of the Harlem unit of the Federal Theater Project, part of the WPA, Works Progress Administration. And it depicts like one of the, probably a historical moment that a lot of us are familiar with, which is the successful slave revolution in Haiti. And so I frame freedom in that way, where all of these odds are stacked against this, and it evidently comes to us in a way where when we think of history, when we think of slave revolutions, when we think of very poignant figures in Black nationalism or in Black power, we think about this moment, this Haitian revolution. So we use that to frame it, and it was showing in New York, so that's a good connection, especially because the next part of this exhibition is a not quintessential, it's a particularly New York story. So this is the Panther 21. And the Panther 21 trial is where 21 Panthers were accused of planning bombings in 3 separate locations across New York. They were arrested. Their bail was set to $100,000. And eventually the number drops, by the way, to 13. So bail was set for all of them. A lot of them were held at Rikers Island, and they were held on charges of conspiracy to attack the police, to kill police officers, to attack buildings. But churches and notable New Yorkers rally around the Panther 21 and start to kind of like raise money for their bail. And this is at the time one of the longest and most expensive trials in New York history, which lasts 8 months. And before I get to the next part, I want to just point out what's happening in these 2 posters. The one on the left has a quote by Afeni Shakur, remember her name. We will have our liberation, or Babylon will have ashes to sleep on. Free the Panthers. So again, thinking about freedom, and it's juxtaposed by the quote, the engraving in the back, which is like, the place of justice is a hallowed place. So just a really interesting poster. And then I think this is probably the showstopper. I haven't heard anyone call it that except myself, but I think it's the showstopper, the one on the right. Power to the people, free the Panther 21. This is a psychedelic poster. If you put a black light on it, it glows, which is really cool. So if anyone's planning any tours through the education department at Poster House, we will show you how it glows in black light. But the backdrop of this poster is just, it's really cool. It gives us the spirit of what's already going on during the 60s into the 70s. So I said, remember that name. So Afeni Shakur is, we all probably recognize her name as Tupac's mother. And at the time of the arrest, she brushes up on the law while in prison. She goes to the prison library and starts to study and starts to really become acquainted with the law. And she ends up representing herself in court. And by cross-examining a police officer that had been undercover at the time, she's able to get him to admit that he was undercover. And a lot of sources say that it's her cross-examination that is part of why the Panther 21, all 21, were eventually acquitted of what they were being imprisoned for. So her cross-examination plays a large part in this acquittal. And it's because she's like, I'm going to represent myself. I'm going to learn about the law. And I know that this person, I'm going to cross-examine this person. Another woman that's arrested is Joan Bird. She's 19 at the time. So these are 2 of our, and this handout is To Our Sisters in Arms, and it documents kind of like the start of them being arrested, their experiences, and all of that. So, and they're pictured on the cover. Let's see the time. Okay, good, great. Okay. Here's another case, and I think I mentioned that I would elaborate on this, but I'll do this really quickly. We have a lot of posters of Bobby Seale. He's some of you might be familiar with the Chicago 8. I think it was like something on Netflix, a movie or a miniseries on Netflix. So there's sorry, 1 second, everyone. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Chicago. Oh no, the Chicago 8. Okay. This is not that. Sorry, I misquoted this this poster. This one is a New Haven trial. So Bobby is bound and gagged in the courtroom, and Emery depicts that moment in which he's being kind of tortured essentially, and there's an abuse of justice that's happening in the courtroom. And Bobby Seale says that this powerful image of the courtroom is part of why he also is acquitted eventually. Part of why he's eventually acquitted, because the nation got to see what an abuse of power looks like. And it's through Emery's work that the nation gets to see this. And we see, and this one's pretty large in the exhibition, we see the language, the fascists have already decided in advance to murder, we have that word, we have the word fascist, naming what it is, murder, Chairman Bobby Seale in the electric chair. And this is from the New Haven Panther trials, in which Alex Rackley, Alex Rackley was tortured and it was caught on tape. We see it again here. And this one's coupled, the one on the left is coupled with a Martin Luther King quote. Very interesting when we think about Black power in itself and how, excuse me, everybody, it's set as like a foil essentially to the civil rights movement. I don't want that to, that's not what we all think. Sorry. So that's not the narrative. Sorry, everybody. I don't know why I promise I'm not getting choked up. That's not the narrative that we want to put out, that both were separate from each other. So we have this poster that's coupled with Martin Luther King quote. And then the last part of the exhibition is a lyric wall. I'm so sorry. It's a lyric wall, and it has the album Seize the Time by Elaine Brown. She sings all the songs on the album. And Seize the Time is a rallying cry. So we printed out all of the lyrics of the songs that are on the record, and it's playing throughout the gallery. And because you all came out virtually on a Tuesday evening, I thought that it would be cool to put this moment in there in the slideshow, where I was looking through some of the newspapers, and in the back of the newspaper, Seize the Time was being sold, and it's the revolutionary album of the time. And so I thought that this would be a really nice little gem to include in the end of the exhibition. And this is how these look. And Seize the Time is also a book by Bobby Seale. Thank you. And I think that, Salvador, do we have questions? Do we have, I'm gonna drink some water. 1 second.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Esperanza. I know you got a little choked up there at the end, but we all know that's just for speaking for 50 minutes straight. And also it is a bit of an emotional exhibition. Let's not let that get lost in this presentation. We do have a few minutes left for questions. If anybody has any, you can drop them in either the chat or the Q&A box, and I'll go ahead and vocalize them for you. First, before we jump into the questions, Esperanza, can you confirm who the first Black vice presidential candidate was, or presidential?
Oh, Frederick Douglass, everyone. Frederick Douglass.
Yep. That did come up in the chat, but I wanted to make sure it was captured for the recording too.
Yes, Frederick Douglass, and he was the running mate to Victoria Woodhull. I also want to mention, my apologies, I didn't mean to put out that the Chicago 8 was just a Netflix special. It's a real life event. I see that Lori in the chat said that it is a real life trial. I only said that because I think that it came out like within the past like year or two. So some people might have seen that on Netflix.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. We have a great question from Matthew. What was the most difficult or challenging process of developing this exhibit?
The most challenging part of developing this exhibition is my undergraduate is in history, and then my graduate degree is in American studies. So I just want to include everything all over. Like I want to take over Poster House and put posters everywhere about things that I'm interested in. So I think editing and tailoring the exhibition was probably the most difficult and challenging part, because we work with an amazing chief curator at the museum who really, who told me, let the posters tell the story. And that helped me edit down the content that we had, because I could have kept going. This would have been a 2-hour presentation, everybody, because it would have been into the hallway. So I think that was probably the most challenging part, editing down, but I see why it's so important to edit this information and give you all, let the posters guide you through.
Mm-hmm. We have a great question from Lincoln. So the exhibition talks a lot about like the enemies that the Black Panther Party made. We touched on COINTELPRO, we touched on, the pigs. But can we chat a little bit about the allies that the Black Panther Party made? They were very good at working with other political groups and actually inspiring a lot of them.
Yeah, I think that it's important that's a really good question. There was a brief alliance between the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Black Panther Party. That I actually want to answer that question by mentioning something that I mentioned earlier, not in this setting, but I mentioned it earlier when we were all on site, kind of like walking through the galleries, and the audience that the Black Panther Party is approaching are like when we think about the like Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, we're thinking about a lot of movements that are centered on like college campuses or like high school campuses, or with and we're thinking also about respectability politics. Like, look at the protests that are happening around the 50s. Like, what are they wearing and what's happening with the Black Panther Party? So thinking about audience kind of helps me think about alliances. The Black Panther Party is within a community, and I'm not saying one is not better than the other and one isn't doing something more effectively than the other. It's just worth thinking about. The Black Panther Party has recruits that are in college. Like I said, Huey is like very well acquainted with the law. Emory Douglas is already design, like focusing on design. Like, a lot of the recruits are coming from college campuses, but also some recruits are just very interested in this party and saying, I would love to just be part of this in any way possible. And they're given like a stack of newspapers and told like, sell these newspapers or work in the design, work with Emory in design, or thinking about just different things. So their alliances are not informal, but when you think about the scape of like what they're working with, their alliances can be anyone within the community. And eventually, like I said, we see them working with people who are part of the anti-war movement. And the anti-war movement at this time, the face of the anti-war movement is a lot of like white college students. And so they're also working with, I interviewed Rosemary Mealy, who is an asset to this exhibition. And she also mentions that within her role, she had to speak to a lot of white women and a lot of like white, at the time it would have been like gay liberation, or lesbian liberation, or the language is very different from what we have today. But she had to speak to a lot of different activists, like white activists, so that she can start to build like solidarity. So the Black Panther Party is not just a separatist organization. And that's why I wanted to define Black nationalism, because sometimes people think Black nationalism equals separatism, equals like they just don't want to have anything to do with anybody else. But they are involved, like they are having open discussions about this. And then Eldridge's like running mates are, a lot of them are white. Like Peggy Terry is a white woman.
Thank you. I would also say that Angela Davis would be considered, right, like an ally rather than like a member of the Black Panther Party, which we talk about extensively in the exhibition, like lending her image like to like the movement work.
Oh, and also when we think about the international aspect of the Black Panther Party, we're thinking about a lot of international organizations that are keeping up to date with what's going on, and like inspired by the work that the Black Panther Party is.
Yeah. And then of course, like we can't like move on from this question without acknowledging the role that the Black Panther Party played in the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, very much aligned with disability activists and the disabled community. We have a question here about what's your next exhibition on this topic going to be? What's the next installment? That's a great question. If you would like to stay up to date on our upcoming exhibitions, you can subscribe to our newsletter by going to posterhouse.org, where we announce all of our upcoming exhibitions and events through our newsletter. What other graphic designers influenced the Black Panther Party posters besides Emory Douglas?
This is a really good question, and I have two ways to answer it. The first one is a more broad answer, just because it was a distinct influence. So Emory worked with OSPAL, so OSPAAL, and I'm looking down at my phone because we just talked about this as an institution and felt that it was pretty important to mention. Organization of Solidarity with People of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. That's what OSPAL stands for. And a lot of OSPAL posters influence or inform, or you can see some of the spirit of an OSPAL poster in what Emory Douglas does. And I have, again, for all the people who came out on a Tuesday, here is kind of like that influence here. And this poster was on the cutting room floor, so unfortunately it's not in the exhibition, but I did see this in person, so this is another one. The second way I want to answer that is we have a handout called Black Power to Black Women, because as I said, I wanted to incorporate Black women in this. And there are two women in particular that are working alongside Emory. One of them, Asali Dixon, is actually like eventually, she's there for the very early parts of the party. And her artwork is pretty distinct. She shows women a lot in her artwork. And when you come to the exhibition, or if you're not able to, maybe there's a way that we can upload the handout in some way so that everybody is able to see it. But there are women that are doing amazing design work for the Black Panther Party, especially in its early stages. Oh, and Dorothy Hayes, yeah, there's a picture. I think I credited one of the photographs and the posters in here. Dorothy Hayes is part of that.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, Esperanza, thank you so much for this informative and overarching tour. To all of our attendees, thank you so much for your time and attention on this Tuesday evening, and all your brilliant questions. It was such a pleasure to be with you all. This exhibition is on view at Poster House through September 10th, so you have plenty of time to come and see it. And we hope to see you at the museum or in a program soon. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.